Welcome. This is the Contreras Report. I'm Raul Lowry Contreras. Before we talk a little about China today, let me state that this is Monday, October 4th, the first day of the new Supreme Court of the United States term for the year. It starts the first Monday of October. We will be talking about the Supreme Court a lot in the next coming 9-10 months because there's some very important decisions and cases they're going to be taking up and making. So, let's start with the talk about China. When I arrived in the United States in November 1943 from Mexico, I was not quite 3 years old. I didn't speak a word of English, neither did my mother, my great-grandmother, and my uncle that came with me to the United States. As a consequence, we didn't know what the small sign said on a small store 2 doors away from us that stated, quote, "We are Chinese." Nor did we understand the posters that they had on their walls inside the store, posters of Chinese soldiers, quote, "fighting for freedom." Within 2 years, however, I learned enough English to associate the word Chinese with children who were Chinese that I played with, who also spoke some English like me. They were different, they said, things that I didn't understand, just as they didn't understand when I spoke Spanish. But we really liked each other. I loved their food and they loved mine. When the war with Japan ended in August 1945, I finally learned why they had a sign on their window during the war stating, "We are Chinese." All Chinese are Asian, but not all Asians are Chinese. I discovered that as I grew up. I didn't know many Chinese, but I liked the ones I knew. That was tested in the 1950-51 fighting between Chinese and the United States troops in Korea. Nevertheless, my regard for the Chinese people improved when President Richard Nixon followed Secretary of State Henry Kissinger to China to meet with the Chinese leadership. Kissinger and Nixon were warmly welcomed. I, like many Americans, hoped that the meeting foreshadowed the decline and ultimate defeat of communism, at least of the Soviet version. Within 20 years, the Soviets disappeared. China started to thrive when Chinese leadership allowed 5 millenniums of capitalist traditions to rise through the communist muck. Flash forward 40 years to President Donald Trump's America, in which some Americans believed that China is the major existential threat to the U.S. I think otherwise. I am not alone. Certainly there are problems between our two countries, but we are inextricably tied to each other with massive two-way trade. Some American jobs have left for China, yes. But as wages and other expenses like transportation rise in China, some of those jobs are returning to the U.S. and Mexico, to North America, the U.S., Canada, and Mexico, what we used to call the NAFTA countries, now called the NAFTA countries. One would hope that massive trade and a large amount of U.S. Treasury bonds and notes owned by the Chinese, that, by the way, is less than 10% of the total, would tend to obviate ideologically fueled problems that would otherwise fester into serious problems. American consumer-based dollars pouring into China in the past 3 decades have exploded per capita income in China upward and modernized China as if a magic wand had been waved over a society that was purely agricultural for thousands of years. Elements within China are not particularly friendly with America, but that does not include the average Chinese person working hard to become middle class. We can live with a middle-class China. So says President Nixon's former U.S. Secretary of State, Henry Kissinger, a personal hero of mine, President Ronald Reagan's Secretary of State, James Baker, Semper Fi to my fellow Marine, and says President Clinton's Secretary of State, Madeleine Albright, and of course the entire foreign policy element of the Bush-Cheney years. They all agree. They participated in the making of a surprisingly interesting and effective documentary entitled Better Angels that explores challenges and opportunities of the world's most important commercial relationship. Check it out. Find it on Google. The big picture of China-American relations is clouded by political rhetoric of jobs leaving the U.S. for China and a flood of one-way dollars pouring out of the U.S. into China. The documentary goes underneath that rhetoric, or behind it. There are parts of, quote, Better Angels, the title, that are truly important. Generationally unemployed Alabamians, for example, working in a new Chinese-owned factory where no industry has existed for 30 years. Mexican-American children in South Central Los Angeles gleefully learning how to use an ancient Chinese abacus and doing high math with their eyes closed. And Chinese teenage boys suiting up with pads and helmets to play American football, coached by a Texas-born Mexican-American. Surprisingly, we learned that between 2011 and 2013, more concrete, cement, was poured in China than in the United States during the entire 20th century. Better Angels is the result of 5 years of hard field work and 2 years of editing by two-time Academy Award-winning director Malcolm Clark. Just getting 3 former U.S. Secretaries of State to agree on the importance of bettering the China-American relationship is a huge accomplishment. The current political situation between nascent China and the America that came out of the American century is not a secret. American President Trump made trade with China a major 2016 campaign issue, and again in 2020, but mostly in 2016. He constantly talked about the trade deficit with China as one of the country's most important issues. President Trump, in railing against China, quote, ripping off the United States of $500 billion a year, has never been correct with that figure. The deficit has hovered around before the pandemic, hovered around $360 billion, not $500 billion. That is a significant difference. What President Trump neglected to mention is that the American people collectively benefit by having Chinese products to buy at better prices. The American standard of living increases, it gets higher, by having Chinese goods to choose and buy. And rather than complaining about deficits, Trump should have been bragging about what we have done for the Chinese standard of living. Additionally, he should have been leading the way in clearing the economic path so Chinese consumers can have more American products to buy. That is the secret to narrowing trade deficits. As it stands today, for every dollar the U.S. sends to China, only 10 cents comes back to the United States. In contrast, for every dollar the U.S. sends to Mexico, our second largest trading partner after Canada and China, Mexico sends 75 cents back to the U.S. Imagine the numbers if the U.S. could do the same with China. Any American president must increase American exports into China. More trade is better. It increases direct Chinese-American interaction at levels away from diplomatic and technical interaction. The documentary Better Angels reflects people-to-people interaction and opportunities leading, hopefully, to competitive coexistence and prosperity. A little Mexican boy playing with little Chinese boys, a Mexican boy eating Chinese food and Chinese boys eating Mexican food in the United States of America worked well at the personal level in the 1940s. In the words of the documentary's producer, William Mundell, this is about changing, quote, the world's largest factory into the world's largest market. This is Raul Lowry Contreras. Subscribe to this channel and you will be updated whenever there is a new episode of the Contreras Report. You can also send me an email with your questions and I promise to respond. The email address will appear on your screen in a few seconds. Thanks for tuning in. We'll see you next time.